From Chicago's Can TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
Well, hi there, and welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom right here on Can TV. I am Ken Davis. You probably have some inkling that the Chicago public school system is in some financial straits. Maybe you've heard the news. You know, there's a couple $100 million here, $1 billion there, shortfalls, and then the state comes in with a couple $100 million, and you know, you've heard all this. There is one budget, though, that seems to just kind of chug along, regardless of whatever else is going on in the classroom or not going on. And it's the budget that they sort of rely on to build new schools and to build additions to existing schools. Haven't done much of that lately, but there is still some construction going on. And it gets real interesting when you look at it at the granular level and you think about aldermen and you think about constituencies and you think about race, which we're not allowed to talk about, and a lot of stuff like that. And you take all of this toxic stuff and you put it all in this big bowl and then you let the mayor just stir it up. And that's why we have Sarah Karp and why we have Becky Vevea over at WBEZ, because they then go and dip into this bowl and take it back to the lab and analyze it and let us know what really is going on. Right?
Right.
That's why you're here today. Sarah Karp, now with the mighty 91.5, haven't had you on the show since you joined WBEZ. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And Becky Vevea, of course, been here before. Glad to have you back again, Becky.
Thank you.
Let's talk about this
Race?
really weird. Yes, let's talk about race. So you found some incredible examples of pairs of schools and things that kind of didn't look right, and then when you get down to it, you find all these other things. Start us off.
Well, we found essentially that a lot of the school construction projects under Mayor Rahm Emanuel were disproportionately going to schools that disproportionately served larger percentages of white students. And oftentimes that was happening in areas where there was an alternative close by, a school with space. Sometimes they shared an immediate border. Sometimes it was half a mile, 2 miles away, and yet we were spending money to build expensive additions. That's the money part of it. The other part of it obviously gets at race and class and willingness to cross racial lines that have existed in this city for decades. Yeah,
and they certainly have. And in so many ways, the story that you've written could have been written in 1968, 1938, I'm sure 1918.
Yeah, one of the experts we talked to actually alluded to former Superintendent Benjamin Willis and his practice of putting trailers at overcrowded black schools to avoid sending, yes, they were called the Willenswagons, to avoid sending those children to under-enrolled white schools. Yeah. We see the opposite happening.
Yeah, yeah. I just dodged those. I was at Stowe at the time, Stowe Elementary, and I think they put the Willis wagons in just after I graduated. But yeah, that was true. All right, so let's get down to some specifics here. Let's talk about one of these pairings. This one is one that I just find incredibly interesting because it's the one in Lincoln Park. You have Lincoln Elementary, which is this school that probably people who've spent a lot of time in Lincoln Park don't even know it's there because it's down Kemper. It's like it's just kind of hidden away, but it's this huge school, and it just got mega huger.
Yeah, they just put an addition on it. So the really interesting thing about this is that there's a school named Menier, and Menier is used to serve kids from Cabrini Green, now mostly serve kids from this huge public subsidized housing complex called Marshfield Gardens. And so the school named Menier shares a boundary with Lincoln Elementary, North Avenue being the dividing line. Now, if you know where Lincoln Elementary is really pretty far from North Avenue. You have to go,
south of Fullerton.
Right, you have to walk and walk and walk. It's about 1.5 miles. And yet, you know, a lot of the kids that live a little north of North Avenue, they actually are way closer to Menier than they would be to Lincoln. And Menier has plenty of space. Now, 3 years ago, Lincoln had a bit of an overcrowding problem. They were not the most overcrowded school in the school district, but they had a bit of a problem. But you also know that area is very wealthy, right? I mean, this is you know, Lincoln Park. And so what winds up happening is out of sort of nowhere, like no plan, nothing would like say to you, okay, Lincoln is the top of the list to get an addition. Suddenly out of nowhere, Mayor Rahm Emanuel announces Lincoln Elementary is getting an addition, a $20 million addition or $19 million addition. And meanwhile, Manier has 350 some kids and has room for, 1,000. So they have plenty of room.
And perfectly solid building.
They have a nice building, a beautiful old building. It's nice. And in fact, like the really interesting about Manier is how people are like, oh, well, maybe it's. Someone actually wrote me after I did a radio piece about Lincoln and Manier, and someone wrote me after, well, the biggest thing was safety concerns, right? But the thing that's interesting about Manier is that on the front and on the south side of Manier, there are subsidized housing. But on the back side and on the north side are really very nice homes. In fact, there's this one townhome in which the windows, the back is like just no windows, but the front has windows, and if their back had windows, they'd actually look onto the playground of Manier. And so I guess it's okay for people to live within spitting distance, but if their kids went to school within spitting distance, there'd be, there'd be
and I think it also has to be pointed out too that the Marshall Field, right? I mean, that was a hulking vacant complex for the last probably 30 years, I think 20 years. It's just been forever. But I mean, I just was by there recently. It's amazing. The place is being it's really coming back to life. Who knows what its success rate will be, but it is not what we think about when we think about 1970s era public housing in Chicago. This is it's a quasi-private place, right?
Right. It's subsidized housing. It's like Section 8. Basically, and the thing is that the biggest issue is that the people from Manier, or the people from Lincoln, do not want their kids to go to school with the kids that come from that housing complex, and that's the overriding. Because there are some kids that do live in the boundary, but there's no kids that are none of the richer residents send their kids there, and so it really gets to the heart of like why are they so why are people so nervous to do that? And
obviously the most obvious question here is, let's just say that on that same day, the mayor actually showed up at Manier with $19 million in a suitcase and just threw it on the table and said, "What can we do for you with $19 million? Could we make this into a pretty decent school?"
Right.
For $5 million, for $1 million, they might be able to do something.
Well, and what is fascinating is not so much necessarily, why are the wealthier residents not willing to send their children there, but why is the district willing to allow this isolated school, this racially isolated, economically isolated school to exist in the middle of one of the best neighborhoods in the city? We're not talking about shipping kids into one of the dicier neighborhoods of the city. We're talking about Old Town. And the fact that the district hasn't done more to bring attention to it or to try to attract a contingent of middle-class families. We talked to researchers who said, pouring money into high poverty schools is also inefficient. You're not going to get those same outcomes. It's far more powerful to have high poverty children in mixed income environments than it is to pour money into a high poverty school. Now, yes, money does matter in high poverty schools, but in terms of what's more powerful, they did a study. One of the researchers I interviewed, Richard Kallenberg, did a study. His organization did a study in Montgomery County, Maryland, where they followed public housing students. One set that went to middle income, mixed income schools, and another that went to high poverty schools. The high poverty schools were spending $2,000 more than these middle income schools were. Yet the results for those two cohorts of kids, the kids in the mixed income schools, were 2 grade levels above the ones in the other schools. And so there's also an argument to be made of why not do something to come up with a way to get buy-in, to get a mixed income community to actually have a mixed income school in it.
Yeah, because I'm guessing that you would have some parents in the wealthier neighborhood who would say, well, if the school facilities are good and if the faculty is good and the school is being improved, as we saw all over the North Side with old elementary schools in the last 20 years, you know, maybe I'll take a chance on this. Maybe this is, maybe I could help make this school better or whatever. But we have this intense distrust. We have distrust of the system itself, and we have distrust of all of us distrust all of the other communities, and that's something that's very, very difficult to get over with. Now, you say, though, that the principal at Menier, it was really was hot on this, would have loved to have seen this happen for her school, right?
Yeah, so he talked
I'm
about
sorry, yeah, sorry.
And he talked about just sort of how even he has a hard time like trying to convince families, even in the Marshfield Gardens, to come into his school because a lot of them take buses to magnet schools.
Yeah.
You know, and people should remember, as if we bring up magnet schools, that those were created under the consent decree when in 1980 the feds said, hey CPS, you're breaking, you got to desegregate your schools, you're breaking laws. And so we have all these great schools. People are like, well, show me where this works. Well, it works all over the city in many of our magnet schools. And I think that it requires some thought and planning on CPS's part that it seems as though they seem to be unwilling to do.
But your reporting, though, was a little bit disturbing to see that since the consent decree was, what was it? Set aside, I guess?
Lifted,
whatever, blown out of the water. We're now seeing that the white schools are getting whiter.
That's right. And so you have, you know, these pockets, and CPS facilitates those pockets. I mean, they sort of say, like today I was at a meeting where an official from CPS, you know, he talks about, well, you know, the real places where we have a lot of overcrowding are the far northwest side and the far southwest side, which are some of the only main white enclaves in our cities. But you know what, the thing is, like Saginaw, Edgebrook, they're not all that far away from in Austin. I mean, really, if you get in your car and you shoot down Central Avenue, you're not that far away. But the way city planners think about this and the school districts think about it is like they're worlds away. They might as well be on different planets.
Wait, are you suggesting that someone who lives in Saguenay would send their children to a school in Austin? Are you suggesting that?
You know what? I think that people in Saginaw will put their kids on a bus and drive very far to send their kids to selective enrollment schools and magnet schools, and that it already happens. You know, there's a lot of busing that already takes place to take kids out of neighborhoods into other places.
But that wasn't my question, was it?
No, I am suggesting that we are in a school district that is in deep debt, does not need to take on more debt. There's no one that could argue that has huge outstanding capital needs, $3 billion of outstanding capital needs.
Just to fix what we already have.
Just to fix what we already have. Kids in schools with roofs, roofs leaking, and that Chicago Public Schools just closed 50 schools. We're probably going to close some more schools for underutilization. It seems like in this context, why we would even think about building an addition or building a new school, it sort of boggles the imagination, unless we're just two different school districts, unless we're in a city that is not connected. I mean, there are schools in Austin, and this is shocking. There are schools that are the highest rated in Chicago public schools in Austin, in brand new buildings, because Mayor Daley built some very new buildings all over Austin in the mid-2000s. So, I mean, by Chicago standards, brand new buildings. That is in a whole different planet than somebody who lives in Edgebrook. Right. I just don't, I mean, I guess that's what we have to discuss as a city.
Yeah. Well, and we've been talking about Menier versus Lincoln, but the other example that you bring up of Brown and Skinner West, which is, I mean, it's just mind-boggling. They are not even a mile apart, are they? I mean, I think
they're like 6 blocks.
6 blocks, exactly,
about 6 blocks, right?
Yeah.
But they are pretty much different cities. I mean, Brown is Brown is kitty corners from the United Center.
And used to serve Henry Horner.
Right, which isn't there.
Isn't there anymore.
Right. So it's 6 blocks, but it's a long way from one to the other. So tell me about Skinner West. Skinner West is one of those schools that Daley built in the 90s, right? Or
2009.
No, 2009.
Yeah, but it was part of like the school modernization construction that was the same.
So it was a brand new school when Rahm Emanuel took over. And it is huge. I mean, I must admit I'd never seen it before. I actually drove by it on the way here today because I just wanted to see this place. I'd seen all your pictures of it. Massive school.
The interesting thing there, for one, is so Skinner West has a gifted program in it that draws kids from all over the city. It's a pretty diverse school in that sense.
So it's a kind of a magnet.
Yeah, well, yeah, it initially was a magnet, and it wasn't until they rebuilt the school in 2009 using the revenues from the TIF over there that they decided to draw a neighborhood boundary around that school and allow neighborhood kids to go there. And then overcrowding started happening. And in that, when you look at CPS data, you can see that there are about 600 of 900,000 kids that are from out of the boundary. And so one of the things that the district's very own master facilities plan says is before you build expensive additions, you should control your enrollment. And by controlled enrollment, you should remove programs like a classical or gifted program that draws kids from all over the city and move that to another building, another school. And actually there's evidence that when they've done those kinds of things, when they've moved these gifted programs into other schools, that some people go. Sarah did some reporting in, and we can get to this, in the South Loop, where they moved the gifted program down to National Teachers Academy. And that's a school that historically served public housing from the State Street corridor. And
that's done on Cermak.
And some parents, when they found out that South Loop is getting a new school, the parents there that are all committed to NTA and improving NTA are like, what does this mean for us? Does this mean then that it kind of ends all of the momentum we've been trying to build and the buzz we've been trying to build around NTA? And so in the case of Skinner, West, and Brown, the district could have decided to move the gifted program to Brown. Now they say we're going to give Brown $5 million and make it a STEM school. It's still, I believe, going to have a neighborhood component. And yes, that will be a very good investment for Brown. I go back to my earlier point, though, unless Brown is able to attract the new residents, that school will remain segregated, that school will remain in a racially and economically isolated situation. And actually, when they drew the boundary, I found some old news clips. When they drew the boundary for Skinner West, they drew it and it stopped at Ashland, which is where Brown's boundary starts. And Ashland, we mapped this out actually after Ashland. You can start to see dots of where CHA, some of the new Plan for Transformation properties are now all west of Ashland. Well, there were some discussions in some local newsletters and papers over there about why are you drawing this boundary at Ashland? Why can't the kids west of Ashland get access to Skinner? And that just
we don't have to be 2
we're
blocks.
Drawing it. We're just drawing the boundary, and that's it. It was kind of like this is a school for the West Loop. Was almost the message that was sent. It's not for the school. It's not for the people that are west of Ashland.
I was going to say that one of the other parts of the story is that the decisions about where to build, where not to build, who's going to even get the new roof, right? Who's going to get the new boiler? It's done in such a vacuum. We have this master's facilities plan, but nowhere in the master's facilities plan does it say, you're first, you're second, you're third, where are you on a list? It's just sort of like, and there's no way for anybody to know. So then you have Rahm Emanuel having these, private meetings with parents, giving out little presents.
$20 million
nice big presents, and they're like, there's no, like, why this school and why not that school? And, I mean, even if you could justify it, if you can justify it, justify it. Come out in public and have a process.
I was looking at some numbers a couple days ago, and I see that, you know what the most overcrowded school in Chicago is? Bridge Elementary. Who's ever heard of it? It's at Oak Park and Irving Park, right? Just a couple blocks from there. It's 231% overcapacity, and Ebinger and Byrne and other schools all up, they're all way overcrowded, and I think dare I say this, but sometimes I think politics is involved in this.
Just a
I mean, you can't avoid coming to this conclusion.
Not in Chicago. That doesn't happen in Chicago.
The promises for all those Northwest Side schools like Ebbinger and Byrne and all those were made a long time ago. That those were going to be in line for these things, and then there was a change in the alderman, and the new alderman votes with Mayor Emanuel only like 40% of the time, and now they're announcing all these new things, and these guys are not in line anymore, and one has to wonder. But it wouldn't have changed even if they had given them. It wouldn't have changed the essence of your story, because these are probably schools that are probably 25% white or more anyway. So
sure, but I actually do think though that there's an argument. There's an argument to look at, and let me remind us that we not so long ago saw a dozen black parents starve themselves to get a high school on the south side of the diet hunger strike. And 5 to 6 years before that, families in Little Village starved themselves on a hunger strike to get a high school. Right. You're talking about areas where, and especially in Little Village, I mean, that's a place where we used to see these, we still sometimes do see 200% overcrowded. Right. And yet they wait and they wait and they starve themselves to get things, whereas for whatever's going on in the outer ring around the loop right now, it's like, oh, somebody mentions it at a cocktail party and all of a sudden you get an annex. I mean, I don't know how it happens. But I'm saying
the cocktail party factor.
It feels a little like these came out of nowhere.
Well, they do. These stories do seem to have this much in common too, because you do have this kind of moment where the announcement is just kind of made, and of course the impression I get from reading your stories and others is that often the LSCs and the parents are standing there saying, what? Us? We thought you were going to give it to those crowded schools.
Yeah, at Lincoln, a lot of people were a little put off because the whole annex takes the whole playground. And so now the kids have nowhere to play, and there's too much traffic, and people weren't jumping up and down necessarily, I mean.
Well, and then we also have Obama High School hanging out there too, right? Is that going to become a reality now that they have the taxing authority? They got this new tax, for facilities.
The new tax for facilities, the capital improvement tax that was passed as part of the hike last fall, is what we've been told is what's funding a lot of these projects.
They get about 40 million.
45 million.
45 million a year.
But even the list we looked at, the list we looked at bonds that out to the max. I mean, that's like they've got $800 million worth of projects on this list, and
so they don't even have the money yet, but they've just given $20 million to Skinner and $5 million to Brown.
Yeah, I think.
But this also sort of adds on to this idea, because Peyton got an addition, which was like nobody could imagine why that happened.
And that was $100 million.
Right. Jones got rebuilt, and then
they rebuilt the entire South Loop to build that.
Right, and then you have there's some plans like floating around about adding some space to Chi-Ag, perhaps. There's a little bit of, then there's like Redunning might get into it. So these are places, the commonality about all these places, that they have a disproportionately high number of white kids, disproportionately high number of wealthy kids, or middle to upper middle. So even though there's citywide enrollment, the way that our selectivity is, the kids that are more middle class have a big advantage in getting into those schools and take up more seats. And so, there's a question like, and you know what, this is the thing, parents, they think they're doing this because everybody wants to get into these schools. I think that's why Emanuel justifies it, like, oh, there's waiting lists, so we have to do it. But I bet you if you talk to a lot of parents, and in fact, I think there's even a protest tomorrow over Obama High School, that parents actually want good neighborhood schools. They want good schools that they know they can get their kids in.
Not neighborhood schools that every single year gets their budget shrunk by 5% or 12% or 15%, and they have to lay off another 2 or 3 teachers.
Right, and that's where the argument about the debt is really, people I think need to ask themselves before they request these big additions is how that adds to the debt load, and then how that then people aren't making the link between that and what the debt load that goes to eating up classroom,
Yeah.
what's available for classrooms. And I think that is another big question. And at the end of the day, it's a lot of public money, and it's about where you're putting it. And on the point about Jones, and I want to say about Jones and Peyton, when we interviewed Janice Jackson, she talked about how, well, just because CPS steps in with a policy, or just because somebody gets a letter. She used to be the principal at Westinghouse out on the west side. It's one of the selective enrollment schools. And Westinghouse fills up, but there are selective enrollment schools that Daley built on the south side that are just, supposed to be the replication of Peyton and Jones and North Side. And those schools are still all black. White families won't go there. And the point kind of that Janice sort of made to us was, just because we give these parents a letter doesn't mean they're going to go there.
Right.
Just because CPS steps in with a policy trying to force people to integrate doesn't mean people will integrate. And I think that's a conversation that's ever more important today than it has been ever before. I mean, it's always been important in this city, but I think with the climate of everything else going on, with police brutality and all the arguments around race, the fact that our city is not having these conversations and we're building schools is something Sarah and I felt very strongly about.
And
covering.
it's very deeply reflected in your reporting too, and I think it's excellent reporting. And by the way, I have to tell you that I don't know if you've made the whole Janice Jackson interview available, if it's online or anything, but just the pieces of it that I've seen and heard, that sounds to me like that was a pretty awesome interview. I mean, am I wrong? It was like she said some things that her press handlers probably weren't happy that she said. It seems to me.
I find Janice to be, frankly, a pretty frank talker. There were some things I think that, because she just took this position a year ago, that I think predates her, and she's not completely sure about how many of the decisions we were looking at were even made.
But I felt that, just from the quotes that I saw attributed to her, that she actually said some rather refreshing things about, what do you want me to do? I mean, it's basically that, right? What do you want me to do? Am I going to go knock on the door and say to this family, oh, by the way, I know you just spent $600,000 for this condo because you got your kid into this school, but we're going to move them over to this school, and you're going to perceive it as being dangerous?
Can I say something that...
We got less than a minute,
okay,
but yes.
Really quick. In New York, when a school reaches capacity, the kid doesn't get a seat there. They have to go to a different school.
Even if they've been there before?
No space is the
No
policy.
space.
No space.
No space.
We've done it. We just gobbled up a whole half hour, and we did not even talk about the new budget. The whole thing with Forrest Claypool yesterday saying, but I mean,
lots to digest there. We're still waiting for a spreadsheet.
Can you summarize it in 10 seconds?
Sarah?
Schools are seeing cuts, but everything's A-okay according to CPS officials.
It's going to be all right. Well, they got $600 million.
All right. It's not as bad as it could be, and schools are used to dealing with the amount of money they have.
Right.
They'll do
and
it.
they got that $600 million, and maybe some of that will come in next year or whatever.
But we're counting on it. We're already budgeting for it. So the damn money better come.
It better come. Oh, wow. Don't you wish we could just go on for another show? Well, we'll have to have these ladies back again some other time real soon, I hope, to carry this on. Thank you very much, Sarah Karp. Thank you very much, Becky Vevea, from WBEZ. And we will talk to them again, I hope, real soon. You have been watching Chicago Newsroom. It's a good production of CAN TV, and we're very glad that you do. And remember that this is the place where you can go for that fabulous weekend in the, out in Michigan, when you go there and just sit and watch TV all weekend. Watch all the old Chicago Newsroom. There's hundreds of them. See you next week with another show. It's convention week next week. Republican convention time. See you then. Bye-bye.